And it is time once again for another AEW Dynamite review here on the MrWarrenHayes Show. Hi, how you doing? I'm Warren. It is January 22nd, 2026. Hope you are all having a lovely week so far. And now it is time for you to take a break and enjoy my review of the January 21st edition of Dynamite, which happened in Orlando, Florida, right? At the Edition Financial Arena. Again, this week, if you want my macro thoughts, here we go. Again, another really solid episode of Dynamite. Minimal nonsense, lots of pro wrestling. I can't complain. I think this was another very good edition of Dynamite. They've really been on a great streak of very good to great to excellent Dynamites. Ever since they started the Continental Classic, really, because I was going to say post World's End, but even during the Continental Classic, obviously, we were on this really good streak. But I've mostly been focused on what they've been doing since the C2, ergo post World's End, because if you recall last year, it wasn't great. But so I've been keeping a particular focus to see on what the issue, what kind of issues would come up this time around, type of thing. And honestly, this has been this post C2 2025 C2 that they've been going through has just been absolutely fantastic. I feel like everything that they have set up within the Continental Classic is just having some very natural follow-throughs and so while in the meantime establishing new stories as well, which have been very good, and we're going to get to that. There's one in particular that I'm very excited about and that I'm seeing come to life, and anyway, we'll get to that in a second. Because we're doing large thoughts here, very high level thoughts. Listen, I think AEW has been on a roll. I think it's been on a roll. Are the shows perfect? No. I don't think there's. It doesn't happen very often. How about that? It doesn't happen very often that we get a perfect professional wrestling show. And I enjoyed last night's Dynamite a lot. But was it great? No, I don't think it was a great show, but it was a really fucking good 2 hours of professional wrestling that just flew by. That had some really good stuff on it. One excellent match on top of it. So, and again, some great story beats. I feel, I gotta tell you, I don't hate this zone that we're in where AEW doesn't feel like it's in an emergency setting. Not an emergency, that's not the way. But they're not rushed to push things because there's a pay-per-view in 3 weeks. You can tell they're taking their time building some stories, and it kind of reminds me of back in the day when AEW only had quarterly pay-per-views, and so there was this whole segment of the build, or at least of the time between pay-per-views. There was this whole segment where, kind of like right now, the world champion would be in TV feuds, having TV matches, and then would slowly get to the main pay-per-view challenger, for instance. And you'd have all sorts of ancillary, mid-card matches and upper mid-card matches, and everything felt good and purposeful, and that everything had time to breathe, I understand, those are halcyon days, and I'm probably looking at them maybe a little through some rose-colored glasses, because maybe you're thinking, oh yeah, but Warren, the build to Full Gear 2020, that shit stunk. I'm just throwing something out there. I don't have anything in particular, and I'm probably seeing this through very rose-colored glasses, but I do remember with more fondness the time where AEW didn't have a monthly pay-per-view to build to. And this is what we're living in right now, because the next pay-per-view that we're going to get is Revolution, which is at the end of February, start of March. I can never remember the date. I'm terrible with dates. There's a lot of things that I'm terrible with, as you know. Terrible with remembering dates is one thing. Terrible with remembering past matches. Terrible with well, that. Those are the only two things I'm terrible with, come to think of it. Everything else, I'm perfect. I don't know why I'm trying to be so hard on myself and trying to think about other things that I'm terrible at. No, it's just these two things, and everything else, I'm golden. I'm so good at this. I'm so good at what I do. I'm excellent. Making is that, look, whatever it is, AEW feels really good these days. I think I think the shows are really well booked. Everything makes a lot of sense, and I'm into it. And I think we're on a really good strip. I think everything feels very good, very positive. There's a good vibe around the company. One that hasn't truly been around since CM Punk hit the bricks. Let's get into things a little more here. I just want to mention the attendance before we go any further. 4,227 tickets were distributed according to WrestleTix. I don't think this is the final count. As I'm recording, I didn't get the final count exactly, so of course there might be a little variance. This overperformed over the overall average of the past 365 days. For Dynamite. They have to be happy on that in that regard. But at the same time, the Edition Financial Arena in Orlando has always been a good venue for AEW. They were here. Well, it was for World's End, so of course the number is going to be higher there. 7,005 people were there, but the last time they were here for a Dynamite was in 2023, December 27, 2023. 5,729 tickets. So, still a sharp decline from the last time that they were here for a Dynamite. Overall, much better than the average attendance over the past, like I said, year, like not calendar year, like actual 365 days, still better, but substantially down from the last time they were here for a Dynamite. Into the card itself, there's something that we just need to mention here that was newsworthy from the show. In a dark match, right? We've got something to talk about that involved an actual dark match. The former Baron Corbin, Bishop Dyer, was given was in a match. He was in a multi-man match. He teamed up with Martin Stone, who is the former Danny Burch. As well as Better Together, Hadar Horvitz and Ori Gold. And they took on Billy Gunn, Austin Gunn, Brady Booker, who used to be he was in NXT for a cup of coffee, Brady Booker. And I can't remember his name, but he was in Chase U. He was in the Chase U gimmick. And Elijah Drago, or Drago, probably Drago. I'm going to go with Drago. Elijah Drago, a guy who has, these two guys have been on AEW dark matches and squash matches before, and in a lot of times paired with each other in a tag team. And like Elijah Drago, he's even beat QT Marshall on one of these dark matches in the past. Anyway, side note here, like we're side noting anything where the news is actually, Bishop Dyer being there and getting a match here on Dark. Of course, being in Orlando, he very likely lives in Orlando. It's probably very easy for him to just like drive down and give it a shot. And they were in town. It's like, oh, why don't we give him a shot? Let's see how it goes. I see a lot of people calling it his debut. I think that's jumping the gun here. I don't think if they were debuting him, they wouldn't have put him on a dark match. This was obviously a tryout. This was AEW kicking the tires on him, an expression that I use regularly. And I don't have necessarily a problem with that. I wouldn't necessarily get excited at the idea of Bishop Dyer suddenly finding a spot on the AEW roster. I don't know. He's got friends. He's not a completely awful worker. I just don't know what Bishop Dyer brings to the table in AEW in 2026. That's all. Just as simple as that. But we'll see, right? We'll see how it goes, and maybe it will turn into a debut. But we got to pump the brakes. This wasn't an AEW debut. This was him having a tryout match. Just as simple as that. Austin in there, probably doing some matches, waiting out for their contracts to expire. Oh, did I say that out loud? So the show began with MJF. Hitting the ring for his promo. He's with Tony Schiavone in the ring. Max does all the typical tricks to get people to boo him, including insulting Tony Schiavone. And he basically says that the year 2026 will be the year of the devil after proving that he has a luxury lifestyle, flaunting his wealth and saying that he has the baddest girl in the world, talking about his wife, because he is the best wrestler alive. So, recently Max was talking about how he wanted to go on the indies and defend the AEW World Championship as much as possible wherever he goes. Because, kind of connecting himself to Ric Flair. This was a very Ric Flair minded promo. There's always been a lot of Ric Flair in Max's presentation. There's a lot of inspiration there. There's a lot of Roddy Piper, but I like this was very, very clearly some MJF, some MJF, Ric Flair directly inspired from stuff. And it's interesting because, in comparison, where Ric Flair would talk about being with tons of girls, MJF is like, no, I'm married and my wife rocks. I'm like, okay, honestly, it's another great way. I think at the very least, it's a much more interesting way to brag. Other than saying, I sleep with all these women. It's like, no. I've got one girl and I've got one girl and she's better than all of your wives and all of your girlfriends. And it's an angle I thought, if there's one guy who can make that work, it's MJF. Anyway, he's going on and Brody King comes in and he interrupts. People start barking immediately as he comes out. And Brody basically says that he wants to rip his spine out and all sorts of violent things after Max defeated Bandito last week. And King demands a world championship match tonight. Wants to choke Max out and take his title. And Max is doing exactly what you'd expect him to do, which is sort of cower a little bit in the corner, being very unsure, being frightened of Big Brody King showing up. But he ultimately dismisses Brody King, saying, when you come out, all of these people bark, but you're all bark and no bite. That because you have never beaten anyone who is on my level, essentially. And I'm like, all right, okay, this is good. This is very good. Tries to show some bravado, steps up in his face, but is quickly shut down as Brody takes a step forward and basically establishing the fact that Max is intimidated at the very least by Brody King. And MJF hits the bricks and then the segment ends. So this is why they have been building Brody King over the past couple of weeks with some squash matches, the little video packages. We've been pointing it out here. Look, I'm all for this. I think these are good TV programs for Max. Like I said at the start of the review, this is the time that you should be doing it. Your back is not up against the wall to promote a pay-per-view. So the timing here couldn't be better. Go ahead and do it. I do wished that nonetheless, and this is me here. This is just personal, but nonetheless, like I'm sharing my thoughts here. This is what you're here for. I kind of hope that Brody was going to get like a legitimate singles push. Whereas now he's just being warmed up as a TV challenger for Max, which again, there's no issue. There's no problems with that. And maybe he will, be in a position where he'll lose up and then go and challenge for one of the numerous mid-card titles in AEW, but he's clearly being prepared to be fed to Max. Again, I don't have a problem with that. It makes sense. I just think Brody King is a guy who the audience would immediately get behind, are immediately behind, and if you set him out on a run, let's say to take out Ricochet, for instance, because Ricochet's a heel, or Okada's international title, people would buy into it. And especially in the case of Okada, people would absolutely 100% go get excited and fully throw their support behind Brodito, and it could turn into a really hot program. And there's still time to do that, don't get me wrong. It's just like, I feel like this little push that they were, or at least the heating up they were doing for Brody, I feel like they just, just took it off the fire too quickly or very quickly in order to feed Max, which again, I don't have a problem with. I would have liked Brody to get a little more shine and maybe end up with a mid-card title, get a proper push, I guess, to a degree. Anyway, I said my piece. It was a good segment. Brody's promo stuff is not his strong suit, but I thought he did fine. He did exactly what he needed to do. I think it's weird because a man that size, right, and who looks the way he does with the tattoos and the facial hair and he's a guy that you'd assume that once he gets a stick, he fires up and he gets completely unhinged, right? But Brody's very poised. And it's a weird dichotomy, and I think it's probably due to just lack of promo time. And I'm not just talking in AEW, I'm talking like throughout his career, maybe, just lack of promo time, identifying a voice for yourself. Like the fact that he comes up to Max and he says, I'm going to do extremely violent things to you, like, tear up your spine and choke you out and stuff like that. It's like, well, yes, I would expect a man that looks like Brody King to be saying those types of things. But I also would be expecting him to be like this unhinged, like mean, fired up guy, whereas he's always like, you always feel like he's trying to get there, but he's also very poised, and maybe it's just a lack of confidence. That's all. But nonetheless, I still think he did a good job. We're not tearing down the house here. I'm not jumping up and down. I think he did a good job. A serviceable, decent job to get this program started. But in general, it's just not his strength. But he did a good job. That's my point. We got a video package with Hangman Adam Page, Kevin Knight, and Speedball Mike Bailey winning the AEW World Trios Championship on Collision, to an interview backstage with Renee Paquette with the three men, and they're talking about creating a name for themselves. What is our trio's name now moving forward? They're recounting a lot of things that they saw on the internet, the Jet Set Rodeo. Of course, they do the horse cock, or at least, Speedball tries to say it, but gets cut off. I don't think they settled on a name. I think it was Joe Gagney that on Twitter, he had put out Air Horse 1, which is probably my favorite. I think that one is really the best. And anyway, look, the horsecock one has gained traction because the audience was chanting horsecock and horsecock related things throughout the entire proceedings when Speedball and Kevin Knight were having their matches, particularly the Speedball match. I want to give a good old shout out to my French Canadian countryman, Speedball Mike Bailey, for forcing me to use the term horsecock multiple times in a review, because I am pretty sure I am pretty sure that I have never uttered the words horsecock in these reviews ever, and especially not as often as I did. That's like, this is history happening right now before your eyes, folks. Anyway, they all get hyped up for their upcoming matches on Dynamite. And of course, I say of course, but Hangman also announces that he's going to have a match with Katsuyori Shibata on Collision, saying that, I just made the match here. I'm like, all right. All right. I just like the idea. Again, this is a very WWE thing to do. It's like, because wrestlers would come up and do their matches themselves, and I challenge you to a match tonight. Okay, let's do it. And that would just be a WWE thing. And I like the idea that there's one guy in charge, the matchmaker, the Tony Khan. It's a little quibble, okay? It's a tiny little quibble, but it's a quibble nonetheless. It irks me enough to actually talk about it. If Hangman had said, announces the match as he's go, I'm wrestling Shibata this Saturday, and the guys go, you can keep the essential of the bit. Where Hangman announces the match with Shibata, and then his two partners go, what? Whoa, really? You're doing that? And Hangman says, oh yeah, I just cleared it with Tony. We're gonna wrestle on Collision. Instead of saying, yeah, I just made the match myself. I don't know. It's these little things that bother me. Just little things like that bother me. Match of the night, Samoa Joe defeated Speedball Mike Bailey in a very good match that could have been an excellent match had it not been for the amount of interference and goofiness by the Ops. It just goes like that. So let's say I do some star value kind of stuff here. I was ready. I was really feeling this match, and I was like, oh, this is really good. I think Speedball is doing such great work working from underneath, and I thought Samoa Joe with his ground game and his leg picks and his ankle picks and his ankle locks, I thought he was doing such a great job. And I was like, oh, we might be climbing up into 4-star territory here, which I consider to be really up there. We're getting into really great to excellent matches. But the interference threw me off, not to the point where I'm going to be like, this match sucked, but it does keep me from really like thinking better of this match. Let's put it that way. This was a very good match, but I think it got in its own way. To ultimately, in the end result, in the end of it all, I think it just got into its own way. Now, I thought that the interference bit where that little sequence that Shibata did, starting on the apron, and then that little sequence of interference that he did, I thought that was so well done and spectacular. And it made a lot of sense, and he, just throws Speedball in. If it had just been that, I even thought that added to the match because it was so good. But no, they did all, the goofy stuff, and there was interference in the finish, and I was like, oh, no, all right, okay. Now I'm officially turned off, and I don't think it's as good as it could have been, even though there was a lot of great work in this match. Ends with a muscle buster. After all the interference and whatnot, so I guess the idea is still, the Ops can't win a match without helping out each other, and Samoa Joe can't put Speedball away without help, I guess. But I don't know. It's not super compelling. Next match that we got was the street fight with the Death Rider team of Jon Moxley, Wheeler Yuta, and Daniel Garcia taking on the Don Callis family trio of Hechicero, Lance Archer, and Rocky Romero. I thought this was a lot of fun. And look, not the street fight that you would think. It wasn't like this absolute, off the rails wild brawl, even though It was very entertaining, and there was a lot of stuff going on. I popped at one point because, you had Jon Moxley in the audience with Lance Archer, and then you had Daniel Garcia and can't remember who was it. He was probably with Hechicero, right? And they were fighting on the ramp, so they did the split screen. I fucking love the split screen. I love the split screen in these type of environments where it's just like, oh shit, like it's giving you at home a taste of how wild it is in the arena, right? Because there's so much stuff going on that we just have to do a split screen. There's no other way to do it. And I love that shit. I think it's great. Every time they do it, I think it's a great idea. A lot of stuff going on. Mox bleeds from his back because he lets himself be chokeslammed, I believe, or powerbombed onto a barbed wire board with glass and tacks. So of course, we got some blood out of this one. Everyone did their part really well. You could tell that Yuta and Garcia were really, really into it as well. But ultimately, and of course, the main part here is when all of the Death Riders started interfering. You had Pac coming out on crutches and swinging it. Sure, and Claudio Castagnoli then comes out to take the remnants of the crutch and then blast Archer on the floor and then toss him into some equipment that then sparks and explodes. That's whatever. And then Marina Shafir, even before all of this, and she goes after Lance Archer, puts him in a triangle. Archer is even, he's clearly in trouble. So everyone's interfering here, getting big reactions. And the Death Riders really did play this as if they were baby faces. So, regardless of what happened in the match, which I don't think is all that interesting, more so than the story they were telling here, which is the Death Riders are baby faces now. The Death Riders are good guys. That's what they tried to convey. That's what came across. People were cheering for Moxley. They were cheering for Garcia. What a great finish, though, right? The sharpshooter, the dragon tamer, as Garcia calls it, with the stomp by Mox. Yeah, that's kind of brutal. I like it. I like it. And Yuta. The idea here was that the Death Riders are baby faces now. That's the story we had to tell. That's what needed to be conveyed. And it was conveyed very clearly. If there was any ambiguity between, what happened, what's been happening over the past couple of weeks, with Mox and the rest of the Death Riders, and now, they're baby faces. That's the message that was made here. Now, I think there's some mixed messaging that exists with Marina Shafir, because later on in the evening, she's going to show up to attack Toni Storm after a match. And that is confusing. That's a little strange, because earlier in the evening, you can argue she's with the babyface unit. She's getting cheered. She's putting big monster, more monster Lance Archer in a triangle. And then later on in the evening, she is choking out. She's choking out one of the top baby faces in the company. So you're like, okay, it's a little bit of mixed messaging that I'm not quite sure what to do with it. She's look, you can tell me, look, she's tweening, and which I can buy, but it's just really weird to do it on a night, to do the Toni Storm attack on a night where the Death Riders had a match specifically designed to put everyone over as baby faces. That's what makes this whole situation weird, and and like I said, is mixed messaging. It's a little confusing, but I'm sure everything will be cleared up. It's just strange. It's just strange that Marina Shafir, part of her babyface unit, later on in the evening, on the night that they turn, comes out later in the evening to choke out the top babyface in the company. I'm like, okay, I'm not sure. Like, that's great storytelling. Anyway, after the match, we got sidetracked a little bit here, but after the match, Jon Moxley tells Don Callis, who is on commentary, to relay a message saying that his man knows exactly where to find him. Ooh, which man is he talking about? Because if I were Don Callis, I'd say, brother, you need to narrow this down. People that are in the Don Callis family is equivalent to the population of Luxembourg. So you're gonna have to help me out here, brother. I can relay the message, just tell me who. We get a backstage segment with the Triangle of Madness, where Tekla is straight out calling Chris Statlander, and another good promo by Tekla. I think she's been very good with the backstage stuff. Followed up by the Sisters of Sin, who both each cut a promo, specifically Julia Hart, telling Willow Nightingale, hey, you're the TBS champion now. I used to be the TBS champion. We never had a rematch, so put up or shut up. In a promo where I thought Julia Hart is better than she has been over the past few weeks. I thought she had a little oomph. She had a little energy to that one. And I was like, oh, okay. I'm not saying that suddenly, I'm not saying that, suddenly she's, Dwayne The Rock Johnson. That's not what I'm saying, but she's closer to The Rock than she is to Ava, right? So in this particular moment, there's a little fire, a little conviction. There's a little something more there. So, I saw that. I caught that immediately. Get the FTR match. We get FTR defeating the debuting Alec Price and Jordan Oliver. Stokely Hathaway beforehand is at ringside, still in his wheelchair, and promotes his foundation, the Stokely Foundation, which is what helpstokelyout.com. What was it? Anyway, a fake site for fake donations. To the match where with the debuting Alec Price and Jordan Oliver, who were picked up recently by AEW. In fact, they did a whole bit where MJF went to defend the AEW title, I believe, at Limitless Wrestling. He fought Alec Price in the main event, and after the match, he offered an AEW contract to both Alec Price and Jordan Oliver, who are a tag team. He offered them both a spot in AEW. They got the graphic on top of that. I believe it was last night. Doesn't matter the timing. They did get the graphic. That's all that matters. And I thought they had a really good showing, a really good debut. Now I talked about my feelings for both of these guys when they were picked up on the stream and on the podcast. You can listen to the Mr. Warren Hayes Show podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, and even on the YouTube channel. So I've talked about it. I've talked about their signings extensively, but in a nutshell, let's say the cliff notes. Alec Price is a guy that I've always wondered why no one was picking up. Might have been a ton of issues or whatever, but this is a guy who's been on the indies for a long time. I'm very happy for him that he never let up, that he always worked super hard. He's a super hard worker. So I'm sure he's thrilled with his opportunity, as is Jordan Oliver, who is a guy that I have always been extremely hard on, for multiple reasons. Again, I don't necessarily want to get into them, but I was never a Jordan Oliver fan. I even question, what do people see in Jordan Oliver? I don't understand. I don't understand the Jordan Oliver hype. I think, whatever, I don't necessarily have to rehash everything. That was my position. But I had noticed, in the last few appearances that I'd seen of him, that he had improved dramatically. And like I said, this is a guy who, of course, at his age, he's online, he sees the comments, and they probably hit him hard at some points, but this is a guy who probably took everything that was being negative that was being said about him, took it to heart, and made it a mission to prove guys like me wrong. And he ultimately did. I think he's a much better wrestler than he was back in the day. Now there's okay. I think he got something here. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that he's world championship material, but he's not the gangly kid who'd throw his body around willy-nilly and didn't have any other understanding of pro wrestling that I had seen for years. Good for him, ultimately, is the point that I'm trying to make. I'm very, very happy for him, because this is a guy who kept his nose to the grindstone. Is that the expression? He just worked. He worked his ass off, and it's paying off for him, and he's making curmudgeons like myself go, you know what? Good for him. He's good now. He's good now. So so that was tremendous. And I thought they had a very good debut, and FTR really did get really gave them a lot of room to shine, and they took every opportunity. They were flying around. Alec Price did his incredible springboard dive, the one that he does where it's like it looks like he's just throwing his body to the wind, which is fantastic. It was all very good. They even fuck up the powerplex for the FTR guys. It was fantastic. It was a very, very solid match, a very good match, and a good debut for Price and Oliver, even though they lost when FTR hit the Shatter Machine. Look, they're in the big time. They're on the big stage now. Let's see what they can do. Let's see how they get booked. Let's see what the future lies for them. And look, you got to commend AEW for keeping their ear to the ground and signing young talent that they can continue to develop, that they can bank on, that they can hang around for a few years still moving forward, whereas other places don't, or just give you more Santina Marella, because of course that's something that everyone really, really wants. Is still to pair these two guys, is to join these two guys up with Nick Wayne, and have a stable of just young fucking assholes, because they can all do that, because it's all stuff that they've done on the indies. Just be like just little punks, just little Gen Z asshole punks, right? They're Gen Zers, right? They're in their 20s. I don't know anymore. When does the Gen Alphas start? I don't even know. I think my youngest is a Gen Alpha, and they're older than him. So look, anyway, my point being is that they could just be a bunch of really, they could be just like a nice, really fun trio of just annoying little shits, and I'd be really into it. I think it'd be a much better pairing than Nick Wayne and Kip Sabian. I think it'd be more interesting. Statlander and the Babes of Wrath backstage, accepting the challenges laid before them by Tekla and Julia Hart, and even Harley Cameron getting in there and saying, Sky Blue, you better watch yourself. And I got to tell you, folks, if there's a match that I am not interested in watching, Harley Cameron in Sky Blue. That is one that, that's a collar tug right there. Not into it. Josh Alexander versus Kenny Omega, though, that got me into it. I was very excited. Kenny Omega comes out first, of course. Gets attacked by Josh Alexander during his presentation. But did you hear that crowd when Kenny Omega came out? Just like last week as well. People want to see Kenny Omega in AEW, and they want to see him active. They want to see him doing stuff. It's really not all that hard. So again, I will reiterate, I am very happy that Kenny Omega is now back, part of the fabric of AEW. And his quest right now, as you know, is to rack up some wins so he can be considered a challenger for Max's AEW title, right? And that is tremendous, which means that we're going to see him more often and more often on television. And you know who else is doing that? Swerve Strickland. And because, he had his match in the main event, and he's in that same type of position where he's like, I'm going to win my way back to the top, which I think inevitably, the story that they're going to tell here, which they haven't hammered over your head, but if you've been watching, if you've been paying attention, you can see it coming. We are going to get to Swerve versus Kenny in a number one contender spot. And that is really exciting. That's something that is also very fresh and a match that a lot of people would like to see. It's as close to getting the rankings back as we'll ever get at this point, because both of these guys are going to start racking up some wins, some big wins. And then at some point, they're both going to want to declare each other as the number one contender. But as we saw last week when Kenny showed up, and shook hands with Adam Page, and Adam Page was, all smiles and whatnot. Swerve was sort of giving him the stink eye. He wasn't quite sure what to do with this dude, right? With Kenny Omega. So listen, if this means that Kenny is going to be more often on Dynamite and is going to be wrestling more, I have no problems with that. If this is moving up toward and Swerve, if this means Swerve is going to be wrestling more, I am absolutely excited about that as well. And if it leads to a confrontation for the number one contendership, like just great dramatic stakes on top of that, what more do you want? You could not have a more basic pro wrestling tale, but again, done with talented dudes, superstars, beloved superstars in the AEW universe. Sorry to have said it that way. I shouldn't have said it that way. In the AEW environment by the fans. It's a compelling, exciting thing that you can latch onto and just to see it through. So now both of these guys got wins tonight. This is going to be significant. At the end of the match here with Josh Alexander, which, by the way, thought was very good, but I don't know. We've seen Josh Alexander have really top tier matches on Dynamite and wherever else. He's still an excellent pro wrestler. I guess I was kind of hoping it'd reach a bit of a higher level. It's not a knock on the match, which I thought was very good and a perfect TV match. Well executed, good drama, some great spots. I don't know. I guess I was hoping that it'd be a couple of nicks higher than this, probably because it's Kenny Omega, right? And why wouldn't you expect greatness out of one of the greatest to ever do it? That being said, of course, Kenny Omega wins with the one-winged angel at the end. And he basically, he's talking to Don Callis and he tells Don, which other guy are you going to send my way? Like, he's already lining up another match. He's like, let's go. Kenny is doing basically like two birds with one stone here. He's getting matches so that he can raise himself up in the ranks, I guess. But at the same time, settling business with his eternal rival, Don Callis, who is always really funny when Kenny shows up. When Kenny comes in close to him, he just like books it. This is like, it was really funny because he goes right into the arena. Kenny has left him run, but he keeps running because he's terrified of Kenny. And he goes up to a security guy, an arena security guy, and he starts talking to him. You got to do something about this guy. And the arena security guy's just looking at him going, just completely blank face and like, I'm not doing jack. And I was like, I don't know what's going on here. Like, so the story they're telling here with Kenny, wanting some matches to be a contender is paralleled by Swerve, who's doing the same thing. Now, Hangman also wants another shot, right, at the world title, but you see what they did? They gave him they gave him the trios titles, and he seems to be continuing his issues with Samoa Joe and the Ops in the meantime, right? So Hangman has been just gently moved aside for the time being in regards to the World Championship. Swerve has the field wide open, but so does Kenny. And I think that's fantastic. And, we might even get to a situation where Hangman has to choose, his best friends. Who is it going to be? But one last thing before we, and we'll move on to the next segment. I just want to point out that AEW, once again, clearly listening to the Mr. Warren Hayes show reviews here on Dynamite. I've been saying for the past couple of weeks, hey, you know what? The Swerve Hangman thing, it's kind of stale now. We need to move on. It's starting to feel not as exciting, not as good. Do something else or have these guys split for a while. And look at what happened. I would have split this up 2 weeks ago, but I'll take this end result right here. I think they made a natural progression as to why Hangman and Swerve won't be cornering each other as immediately as much as they have been, for weeks now. So I'm all for it. I'm glad. Let's put that one away and have the Mega Powers reunite when, I don't know, when Will Ospreay shows up so everyone can cry. Do the crying face emojis on social media. With Taz. That's what it's called, right? Wasn't that what it's called? They're bringing that back. I'm okay with it. I think it's a fun. Look, it's different. It's something that the other guys will not do. I will say though that they really need to improve the graphics work on it. I thought everything felt very stock image. The reticules that they were using, to zoom in on things. They weren't really zooming in. They were just like overlaying it. It felt all very stock image. It felt like something MrWarrenHayes would do, but these people have millions of dollars and a staff, to do great and exciting, motion design. Come up with something better next week if you're going to do that again. But otherwise, I'm thoroughly entertained with Taz pulling out like the judo names for these moves and whatnot. Yeah, there's something very throwbackish about it, and I enjoy it. Megan Bayne and Penelope Ford defeat Toni Storm and Mina Shirakawa, aka the Timeless Love Bombs. I still think Megan Bayne is the most improved wrestler of 2025. I think she looked very good again in the ring in this match here. Penelope Ford is what she is. I am not a fan of Mina Shirakawa, guys. I don't know. I'm just not a fan of Mina. I think she's she has great crowd connection. She's got some great energy, some explosive babyface energy, but I don't know. She's so incredibly hit and miss, and she's sloppy at times, and there's stuff that happens that doesn't even connect. Like there's a moment here that this match completely just fell apart for about 20 seconds. They were able to get it back up, but I don't know. It was a match that happened. It's fine. I wish Megan Bayne did more solo stuff. I honestly wish Megan Bayne would just that they'd revisit the solo run where I think when she came in, she wasn't a finished product like she feels now. I think a 2026 singles push for Megan Bayne would be a lot more interesting than the one she got when she came in, where she immediately went after Toni Storm, if you recall. I don't know. Those are the extent of my thoughts. And then, of course, Marina Shafir attacks Toni Storm after the match, which we already talked about. We get a video package for Claudio Castagnoli versus Roderick Strong. Roderick Strong was in Mexico last week. Notably, amongst other things, he defeated Hechicero in Arena Mexico to become the number one contender for the CMLL World Heavyweight Championship, which is, of course, is being held by Claudio Castagnoli and is going to be defended on Collision this week. So I already saw not some spoilers, but some pictures of the setup. They did the whole they did the whole title photo shoot, pre-match photo op, I should say, that they usually do in CMLL. You'll have the office that are there. You'll have people seconding them in their corners and whatnot. That'll all be part of the photo, the referee. So Tony Khan is out there, since the Luther Rhodes aren't there, and whatnot. So Tony's there and they all take the pictures. They do the whole CMLL rigmarole, which I appreciated. And then the main event where Swerve Strickland defeated Kevin Knight. This match was excellent. This was such a great finish to this show. Just a tremendous main event that was so well put together, well worked. And again, Kevin Knight proving his goddamn worth. What a 2 months this guy has had from his matches in the C2, right? Which even go back to November, right? When you think about it, but November? No, really December. Again, no good with dates, right? But his matches in the C2, he had a couple of standout matches there. Then he comes in with Swerve, one of the top guys of the company, who works with him, makes him look like $1 million. And Knight is doing extraordinary stuff when he does the springboard super Hurricane Rana on Swerve. Crowd is up on their feet from that moment on. The Orlando crowd is up on their feet, and they didn't sit down for the rest of the match. They were cheering Kevin Knight on, who immediately then follows up with the coast to coast, which, by the way, I'm annoyed at how coast to coasts are shot now. And this, not just in AEW, we see it more often in AEW because it's part of Kevin Knight's repertoire. But it really annoys me now that the camera is shot from an angle that is behind the guy who's receiving the move, as opposed to the wide shot, right? Where you see the actual move. And that's what's impressive about a coast to coast. That's what's impressive. It's the distance really exciting where you're like, holy shit, this was something spectacular that I just saw. Now, I understand why they do it, because the coast to coast is also a move that doesn't always land, right? So I understand why they do it, but it doesn't look as impressive from the angle from being like in this circumstance here, from being behind Swerve, because it just looks like Kevin Knight is just like falling into him. He just and then at some point just disappears behind Swerve's body, and I'm like, it's not exciting. It's not cool. Yes, they will show it on the replay, and that's another reason why they shoot it that way, because they're like, look, if it doesn't connect, we don't do the replay. If it connects, we do the replay. But the replay isn't as exciting than seeing it happen like on the first time, on the first shot, right? From the first time you see it land, and you're like, holy shit, that was amazing. If you see it on the replay, well, you're expecting it. You look at it and say, yeah, that's pretty cool. As opposed to getting a real deal pop, which is what the audience did when it happened, right? So I don't know, maybe, and from the looks of things, Kevin Knight has not been fucking up the move. I say give Kevin Knight the benefit of the doubt and shoot it in a way so that it does look as fucking impressive as it is, as a coast to coast is. That being said, it's a nitpick, but nonetheless, it's a nitpick that bothers me because Kevin Knight is so fucking good at what he does. He's so incredibly good. He was terrific in this match. I'd give this 4 stars, quite frankly. I thought this was an excellent match. And there was this really frantic exchange towards the end where he, like I said, Kevin Knight, he does the springboard Hurricane Rana, he does the coast to coast, and then follows up with the UFO splash, and everyone is going nuts. But of course, there's an exchange later on towards the end, and Swerve gets the upper hand and lands he lands a vertebraker, which is something you don't see every day in pro wrestling in 2026, and then follows with the big pressure to secure the win. Now, if I were overseeing the career of Kevin Knight, me being Tony Khan and seeing that this kid has something really special, I would have multiple occasions where Kevin Knight and Swerve would fight each other. Singles matches, tag team, trios. And every time Swerve wins these matches, right? He beats him every time. But you could feel also that it's a very Japanese way of doing things, but classic. And it worked. Every time Knight would just get a little closer to beating Swerve. Every time Swerve would have to work a little harder. He'd have to sneak out a win. And then you get to a point where Swerve just gets by on the, by the skin of his teeth. And then at some point, you decide to pull the trigger. Maybe it's Strickland Night 4. And that's finally the one where Kevin Knight finally fucking gets the win on Swerve Strickland. And I shared that out on Blue Sky, and I had someone say, he should do that while he's champion. It's like, sure, yes, but also it doesn't matter. Because the idea would be to elevate Kevin Knight into a star. And if you tell that story, like, you're immediately putting him in top tier, in a top tier environment with the top guys. He'll have earned that spot. So it doesn't even matter if the title is involved or not. The reward is beating Swerve. So if Tony does see a future for Kevin Knight as a top guy in his company, which he should, which I believe is a surer bet than Bandito, for instance, which I know everyone is into Bandito, and I like Bandito. I think he has the makings of being, he could be a world champion, right? But as a top guy, a sustained top guy, I think Kevin Knight has much more upside than Bandito. I think he's a surer thing than Bandito. And everyone seems to think that Bandito is a sure thing to be an AEW world champion, especially after the MJF promo from last week post-match. Everyone seems to think he's a shoo-in, and I think he can have a run as world champion. Is he a top guy though? I don't know. I think the audience likes him enough. I think I think there is enough crowd connection for that to be plausible, but I think Kevin Knight is a sure thing. And I think I think overall he's a stronger, steadier pro wrestler than Bandito can be. And now I'm splitting hairs. I'm not saying Bandito is a terrible wrestler. I'm just saying Bandito is, he can have off days. we've all seen the off days in a few circumstances. Anyway, I'm getting off track. The point that I'm making is ultimately, I think Tony Khan right now with Swerve and Kevin Knight, Swerve really putting himself in a position where he's little broing Kevin Knight, where he's like, hey, he did it last week, pat him on his head, said, you've got a future here, kid. What would be the best payoff then for that comment and for Swerve sort of little broing him to eventually get beaten by Kevin Knight? And Kevin Knight just getting better, figuring out the sauce right in front of us with every match that he has against Swerve. I think it's a shoe-in, it's fantasy booking, and maybe I'm working myself into a shoot here. But I think that's the. I think it's an easy story to tell. It's a classic story to tell. But you've got the talents, like you have the two talented dudes to pull it off, and you've got a future with Kevin Knight as a top guy in your company. So why not go ahead and do it anyway? And MJF was watching all of this from a skybox, sipping champagne. So he was keeping an eye on the proceedings. And so establishing that Swerve is a guy that is angling to get a number one contendership spot, as well. So there you go. That's my review. Another very good show, and it's 2 hours that flew by with a very good Orlando crowd on top of that. They were really, really into it. There's right now. There's a very good vibe around AEW. I think AEW's been extremely good for the past ever since we came out of World's End. I'm just focusing on that period because I thought the Continental Classic again was just excellent times for AEW. But now in the post C2 months, we've been on such a roll. Good to great to excellent weeks of Dynamite and Collision on top of that. So there's a good vibe around it all right now. I'm very, very into it. Some really interesting stories being laid out. I'm into it. This is great stuff, and I hope you're enjoying Dynamite as well. But more importantly, I hope you're enjoying these reviews. And if you do, we'll leave a like here on YouTube, or a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, or a 5-star rating on Spotify. I will be back later tonight if you're listening to this on Thursday with a stream on the YouTube channel. Otherwise, Monday for another stream, and another Mr. Warren Hayes show next Wednesday, and another Dynamite review here as well. So thank you again for being here. Hope you have a great rest of your week, and I'll see you next time.